Absolutely. I'm going to hit okay for that. So I also think it's harder because for many patients are just diagnosed at a later stage. And sometimes that diagnosis, it may take a long time to get there, but sometimes for, I think, many patients, it's also quite an abrupt diagnosis. It's as a result of a visit to an emergency department or maybe jaundice developing. And so I always felt when I worked in pancreatic cancer, it was sort of going from 0 to 60 in 5 seconds. You had to get to grips with this disease, understand its implications, take a lot of really important decisions, process a lot of complex information, all, in a very compressed and intense timeline. And it's very difficult to say to people, and now you should get in front of all of this and self-advocate. People are dealing with a huge amount. The pathways are complex. You'll know that more than I do. I do believe that the emotional and practical burdens in pancreatic cancer are greater for patients and caregivers for the reasons we've talked above. And then again, that navigating, it's a complex healthcare system and you're trying to communicate with primary care, secondary care, specialist centers. So when we say to people, you must self-advocate, I think we must also think walk a mile in the shoes of someone who's trying to work their way, past all of these challenges. Oops, let's go here. But it's also the case our healthcare systems are really, talk about, being committed to patient involvement, wanting patient engagement in, caregivers or patients at the heart of everything, shared decision making. So it's when you go into a hospital or there's often branding that'll talk about patients being at the center of things and no decision about you without you, which is wonderful, but also I think challenging. And we also, and this is true for pancreatic cancer, that cancer care has just become much more complicated. We've had two people on this call talk about genetics in relation to the disease. I can tell you that that's the first time in this kind of setting I've heard that conversation. And I think we have, in a very exciting way, a lot of really important and really amazing advances and developments that are coming down the track. But it also means that there are more complex decisions and more decision points for people to have to navigate. So we're in a more complex cancer landscape, and we're in a landscape where healthcare systems are, speak, um, you know, very strongly about their commitment to shared decision making and to advocacy. But in reality, our healthcare systems are also hugely stressed and stretched. So, on the one hand, our healthcare systems are saying we want your engagement, we want you to participate in decisions, important decisions. On the other hand, um, our healthcare professionals have such limited time. So, self-advocacy in cancer care really means about you being able to express your needs and concerns and feeling that your voice is being heard. It's just feeling when you have your interaction with the healthcare system that you're being heard and listened to, and that if it is your choice, that you are participating in decisions that are being taken and being given the information to be able to participate fully. And at its essence, I think it's really almost about creating that team that works with you, that you are part of, that you're in the middle and around you. You have your healthcare professionals and your nurse staff and your not-for-profit organizations that are supporting you, but you are, and I don't want to say driving seat because I think that's, um, you know, additional pressure, but that you feel that you are part of that team. So, um, we can talk about some examples of why self-advocacy is so important, and these are examples that I've seen in my time. But I would like now to open it up for comments or observations about um, about advocacy and your role as patients or caregivers in advocating, and very interested in we want to talk about your experiences as well. But does anybody have any comments or questions or observations up to this point in terms of this discussion? Doing legwork that and you're in a system that's not yours or so it's such a waste of everyone's energy and time that that you're bouncing back and forth and trying to explain to a GP something that is right. They may just not have gotten the right communication, and so so I think it's a real I do feel it's that people can self-advocate, but the challenge is that you're in a system that's quite foreign and has its own rules. And I do think also when we talk about standard of care, which is really important, um, what we're talking about now, though, is also about what, for you as an individual, standard of care is when we look across the huge populations and we say this is what everyone, should get or expect. Whereas self-advocacy is often about the small things that you want to change that work for you and not the other, cohort of patients. So you want to reduce your dosage because, the side effects, the neuropathy is, hard, or, so it also goes at odds when people start talking about standard of care. You're then having to say, but what I have an individual need that may sit outside what's documented in a standard of care, and I want to talk about what that looks like, and that can be hard, I think, in the system. So I think that a little what we're touching on really is about kind of, well, the barriers, which are many, to be a good self-advocate, but also, how do you gain confidence in your role and really, I guess, not take those knockbacks in ways that kind of wear you down to eventually you just stop self-advocating for yourself because it's so frustrating and time consuming. And part of it, and I think, we've touched on it in your experience, is about, what are the questions that you want to ask? And as, patients, it's another job just thinking when I go, what do I need? What's important for me? What do I want to know? What is the information I need to have to better understand my options and take some of those decisions about trade-offs? And as you guys have so eloquently shared, how do you just not put up with being put off? How do you stay the course and, pick your battles, I guess, and, not be knocked back when you really feel something's important to you. And I don't have answers. But what I see and hear here is very much this is about the role that you need to occupy us when you're trying to self-advocate. And there are, and everyone on this Zoom call, I think, could probably write a book about this, about your learnings. And these are, just some of the things that are, out there as kind of standard good practice. But, I think the preparation, preparing those lists of questions for your appointments is just critical because they're so short, and you have very little control of that agenda unless you wrestle control of the agenda back. But I also believe really strongly in thinking about what's important to you and write that list down. You may not share it, you may not bring it to the appointment, but you know, if you want to live your life well, you want to go to your daughter's wedding, you want to be able to travel, you want to not have the port, what is important to you and what are the kind of non-negotiables. I think the symptom tracker is just a way of documenting something. And once you document that, I think it's very hard for the system to dismiss it, because if it's on paper and you've shared it, then you have a audit trail basically of what you've raised. I do feel so strongly about, if you can find someone within that team of professionals that is empathetic and will, is consistent in the team. And I think another problem is certainly what I hear from people is you don't always see the same person twice, and people in your team are moving around all the time. But if you can find a person within that team, a resource who you can count on and who is empathetic and who um, is really there to support you, don't um, make sure you make that contact and reach out. There can be nurses. I think groups like today, it just feels to me this is a really important connection for everyone in terms of other people's experiences. You're not always told that there are patient groups, support groups, you know, other professionals working in the healthcare system that may not be in the oncology department, but could be incredibly helpful in terms of support. And just ask for signposting. I think a lot of physicians in the moment when they're with you are so focused on the clinical element of your care and treatment that they really don't think about the rest of your life and how a cancer diagnosis will impact on on your life and your priorities. So I would be interested in tips and strategies that you've used to effectively self-advocate. I think we've heard a few of them now. Some you have to stick with, and I think it's the long game. I think that's excellent. And what you've described is exactly writing it down, keeping your journal. And you have the good fortune, I think, of clearly being at a center where you have empathetic oncologists and, perhaps less stressed or whatever the formula is. You're the gold standard really in terms of how that relationship should work. And it really, and I know that no one on this session would, disagree. It's not about always getting what you want, but it is about feeling that your priorities are being heard, that your concerns are being heard. And if you feel very strongly about something, working, unless there's some very good reason, working with you to help you kind of achieve that. And so from a patient perspective, I think that's what, successful self-advocacy um, looks like. I did go, and I'm going to do Aaron a little plug for Craig's Costs right now. There are a lot of really useful resources. I just happened to go through the Craig's Cost site earlier this morning. This is just an example of a resource that I think people would really benefit from. Just this is about diagnosis. I think there's a second list of questions about surgery, another list about chemo, but the kinds of things that these sorts of prompts that you might use when you go to appointments. So I think there are tools out there, and I believe that often, and on your site, Erin, on the Craig's Cost website, there's also a list of other resources that have good can support in terms of just practical tools and navigation. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now. But I think it comes back to often the quality of the relationship you have with your oncologist or the oncology team, sadly, the level of resource or the lack of resource perhaps at that particular institution, and how much, time that they have or don't have to participate. I think it's about, really the role of nurses, in my opinion, in the just in that team of healthcare professionals that you're working with. And I in my career have felt that they have been the great champions of patients when others have just, not been focused on that, or it's not kind of the thing that's their priority. So, um, I think a lot of what people have shared today is very good practice in terms of self-advocacy. And I think you've expertly, as I knew you would, highlighted the many barriers and challenges that you can face. And actually, the need to um, take control, which is very, very hard. I think we ask so much from cancer patients, and to also have to be your own navigators, and champions is, I think, also a significant burden at times. And so those are my thoughts. I had a few other slides, but I think the conversation really covered them all. So I do not need to share them. Any last thoughts, Erin? Any thoughts from you? Any from the group here today? So Erin, I think we're 2 minutes over, but I think that's okay.
Yeah.
I'm gonna
Yeah.
and just before we close to say, what a privilege it is to spend a little time with this group today. Just really, you know, it's a privilege. Just so interested in your stories and your resilience and your, you know, thoughtfulness. It's really neat. It's made my weekend.
Oh, thank you so much, Claire. Thank you so much for doing this presentation. I think it was great, and I think the interactive part of it, like you said, like that's the only way we're going to get that information is by talking to the people who have been through it. So I think that was a really, really engaging discussion and really interesting discussion. So thank you so much for taking the time on the weekend too to do this, and thank you everyone so much for coming out and coming out on your weekend. We really, really appreciate it. This was a recorded session, most of it. um, so.
I don't think it was.
Yeah, exactly. So it will be posted. Again, apologies. I know our recordings take a little bit longer just to find just to get all the videos edited down. But they will be available soon. And then just a reminder to everyone to do the quizzes for each of the modules so that you'll be eligible for your sweatshirt at the
Oh,
end.
great.
Yeah, so very exciting. So thank you so much, Clara, though this was a really, really great discussion.
Thank you. Thank you
Please,
all.
if you haven't taken the survey and you had anything to say today, like that's the place to put it, and that's where we can really, really put some action to it too. So if you haven't had a chance to do that yet, please do the survey. And yeah, other than that, we'll let everybody go. Thank you so much again.
Thank you, everyone. Hope to see you soon. Good
Okay,
luck
thank
with
you.
it. Stay strong.
Bye,
So
everyone.
much. Bye bye.
Bye.
Bye.